Thanks for joining the Justice Project for a special discussion on George Floyd's murder and the moral response, which is our righteous outrage. Racism, hate, and violence has forged American justice towards Black Americans for over 400 years. The legacy of rape, the legacy of bondage, the legacy of family destruction, dehumanization, mental and physical terror has scarred the nation's landscape and left trauma and systemic oppression in its wake. This moment of pandemic, this moment of pain and uprising can energize Black liberation and dismantle police brutality. This moment can build power to undo systemic racism and increase transformational love. As we all watch the viral video of the murder of George Floyd, we had no idea who he was. George was a native of Houston, a father to 6-year-old Guyana, a Christian, and a truck driver. He was attacked by Minnesota police, who are all now facing murder charges. Their violence was fueled by a system birthed in white supremacy that traffics in the capture, the control, and the denial of Black freedom, the denial of Black hope, and looks to kill Black bodies. During the protest in memory of George Floyd, police attacks persisted. Locally here in Vallejo, 22-year-old Latino Sean Monterosa was killed by an officer-involved shooting. In the South, in Atlanta, 2 Black students, Messiah Young and Tanya Pilgrim, were accosted by police. In Louisville, David McAtee, owner of a barbecue spot, was killed by an officer-involved shooting. And right here in our city that we call home, San Jose and Santa Clara County, many nonviolent protesters were tased and blasted with rubber bullets. According to the Washington Post, police rage usually targets Black men in America. They're murdered by police at a rate that is nearly 3 times as high than their white men, or by white men. George Floyd's murder was a modern day lynching. And his attackers, they didn't fear reprisal as George's body went limp as he called out for his mother, his deceased mother. Now George's fight is over and our struggle is ignited as we call his name, George Floyd. On the streets of London, we say his name. In South Africa, we say his name. In Germany, we say his name. And right here in Santa Clara County, we say his name. Where multi-ethnic local students and faith leaders unite to denounce police brutality against all Black lives and demand accountability and justice. The county's largest city is San Jose, and our mayor and police chief both denounced George's murder at the hands of violent police. Yet, Twitter captured San Jose police force taunting protesters and spraying them with tear gas and flash-tearing rubber bullets. PACT calls for the transformational change as it is joined by over 100 faith leaders who stand against police brutality, who stand against racial terror. Theologian James Cone wrote, "God snatches victory out of defeat, life out of death, and hope out of despair, as revealed in the Christ." And hope was the force that empowered Dr. Martin Luther King. Imaginative hope, determined to see freedom, and strategic and revolutionary is the divine motivation. Man's greatest problem, Dr. King said, are racial justice around the world, poverty, and war. When man solves these 3 goals and these 3 great problems, man will have squared his moral progress and his scientific progress. And more importantly, he will have learned the practical art of living in harmony. In the spirit of Kingian justice, to listen to understand as authentic local leaders share how moral courage can transform racial justice in Santa Clara County. I'm Reverend Ray. I'm the Executive Director for PACT, People Acting in Community Together, here in Santa Clara County. We are multi-faith, multicultural organizers who develop leaders to speak truth to power. We push for racial and criminal justice for all. We stand for Black Lives Matter, restorative justice, and police accountability. We push mayors like Licardo and Chief Garcia and sheriffs and our district attorney to get on board with transforming unjust systems so everyone gets the same quality of life. So we welcome you to the Justice Project. Right now, I'd like to welcome our guests, and I'd like to give them the opportunity to say a little bit about themselves. And I'd like to first introduce our first guest, the 2018 PACT Luncheon awardee, Ms. Zara Billah. Welcome, Zara.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Reverend Ray, for that powerful opening and for the work that you and PACT do in this moment, but also have been doing for so long. My name is Zahra Billah. I'm the Executive Director of the San Francisco Bay Area Office of CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations. I'm a lawyer and community organizer, and I acknowledge that a lot of my work, actually that all of my work is built on the shoulders of Black leaders who built the civil rights movement in this country and who worked so hard, not just to pass the Civil Rights Act, but also the Immigration and Naturalization Act, which my family is a beneficiary of. Much of my work today focuses on the first and second generation immigrant segment of the Muslim community. And so I'm here to learn and to be of service and to follow the leadership of Black individuals who are at the center of this and have been doing it for so long.
Welcome, Zahra. I can't say your name the way it's supposed to be said, so forgive me.
That's okay.
Thank you. Love and blessings to you. I'd like to now introduce my big brother, as I call him, because we came and were birthed by the same father ministry at Emmanuel Baptist Church. I'd like to welcome Reverend Jeff Moore.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for having me here. I'm so glad to be amongst distinguished panel at a time like this that is calling all of us together to push for change and be part of the reset of America. I'm Reverend Moore, Pastor Moore, president of the San Jose Silicon Valley NAACP. I sit on the California-Hawaii State Executive Committee as the religious chair. And more than anything, I like to consider myself the doulos one, always in the service of Christ and God and doing whatever He will allow me to do with the power of the Spirit of God to show love for His people. I believe that we're called to, as Christians, to be known by the love we show one to another. And I just hope to exemplify and magnify that love and my sacrifice to do whatever I can to protect my community members here in San Jose. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jeff, and welcome. All right, next, we'd like to invite Craig Pasquale to our great panel this evening. Craig, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, good afternoon, Reverend Ray. Thank you very much for having me here. And my fellow panel members, it's an honor to be with all of you. And it's an honor to be with those that are out doing the service and making things change. And my thoughts are with all of you right now. Again, my name is Craig Pasqua. I am a Kituwa and Pitt River Paiute, and I'm a registered member of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. And grew up there until I came in my tribal homeland until I came out here to California after my early school. And presently, I co-host of Native Voice TV and Native Voice Media. And I'm very active in the Native community, as well as the tennis community. I've been a tennis pro for 25 years. And so that's my side gig. And it's just a pleasure to be here and looking forward to today. So thanks for the welcome.
Thank you, Craig, and welcome. Next, I'd like to invite of our great panel, Professor Marcos Pizarro. Marcos, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Reverend Ray. Appreciate you having me join this panel. I appreciate the work that PACT's done. So like Reverend Ray said, my name is Marcos. I'm the son of Leonard and Helena, Chicano father and a Dutch mother. That's why I look like I do. And partner to Esther Fernandez and father to Xochitl and Citlali. Yeah, I mean, the thing that part of my introduction that kind of resonates the most right now with me is that I was a teacher in Inglewood in '92 when the rebellion happened, post Rodney King verdict, and that's been speaking loudly to me and thinking about the kind of like the trajectory that we've gone on. So I come here today with a heavy heart, but grateful for the opportunity. I teach at San Jose State. I'm associate dean for the College of Ed and a professor of Chicanic Studies. And so I often say to my students, we're in the Church of Chicanic Studies, so I feel like I'm right at home here on this panel.
Right on, Brother Marcos. Thank you and welcome. And last but not least, Richard Khanna, we want to welcome you and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, thanks so much, Reverend Ray, and I really appreciate being invited to be part of this really important panel. Richard Khanna, Executive Director of the Asian Law Alliance. I've been the Executive Director for the last 20 years or so, one of the founders of the organization. And I'm just really proud to have been able to work side by side with Reverend Moore for quite a few years around police accountability with what's called the Coalition for Justice and Accountability. And I look forward to further discussions on this topic today. Thanks.
Thank you, Richard, and we're glad to have you here. Before we dive into it, I'd just like to offer a simple prayer and blessings. I'd like to say thank you in the name of love, in the name of faith known by many names, in the name of just life for those who live life, who may not be connected to faith, but we're connected as brothers and sisters. Where I'm hungry, my bread is your bread. When I'm thirsty, your drink is my drink. So in this sacred space and in the name of love, I open up this discussion so that it may be used for peace and justice and law and love. May it be transformational. And may we all see ourselves united together where our journey and the success of our journey is intertwined. If we are to be successful, we are to be successful together. Now, for the blessings of George Floyd and his family, I say peace to his journey. I pray blessings to his family. And I say, pray healing to this world. In the name of faith, in the name of love. Amen. Shalom and Ashe. All right, let's get right to it. I'm so happy, these amazing faces on this panel. We have a lot to talk about today, and we'll be efficient in using your time. So let's get right into it. We're gonna dive right into the deep end of righteous rage. Professor and activist, Cornel West, we know him. He's a great agitator. He said, this moment of rage and protest must not only be a rebellion against the unjust system, marred by racism and violence against Black people, it must also be a revolution tied to moral and spiritual clarity and love. Let's start with Zara. Can you respond to this statement and what philosophy Cornel speaks to?
I think what it says to me is that it's so important that we center our intentions and our vision for what we hope to accomplish. And that if we can keep that front and center, that we will be most effective and sustainable and compelling in our fights. That said, I also want to be clear that I don't think it's my place to tell someone how to be upset, how to feel, and frankly, how to act in this context, right? I think it is, and I cross a line when I do that. I speak from a place of privilege when I do that. So there's this like, how do we like theorize about it? And then when we get down to practice, ideally we've all agreed on theory and the practice aligns, but where I think it doesn't, for me as a non-Black person, I need to shut up and sit down.
Thank you, Zara. We appreciate the honesty and the transparency. I think we all on this side sit in a position of privilege, but have a great responsibility. Dr. Richard, go ahead and share in your perspective.
Oh, me? I'm sorry. I'm not being used to being called a doctor. As immigrants and refugees, many families in the Asian American community may not understand the history of oppression of Black lives in this country since its founding. But our communities have benefited from the Black freedom struggles that paved the way for Asian Americans' own fights for equal treatment in the US. George Floyd's murder is a continuation of the long history of criminalization and dehumanization of Black lives. As Asian Americans, we must now say that Black lives matter. We also cannot and must not ignore the role of Officer Tao Tao, an Asian American former Minnesota police officer who participated in murdering George Floyd. Officer Tao has recently been charged for his complicit role in George Floyd's death, and he, along with the 2 other officers, should be found guilty and convicted. And Derek Chauvin must also and should also be found guilty for murdering George Floyd. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And you are JD, so I get to call you Dr. Richard. Thank you so much for that reflection. And it's such a great thing when all of our communities in the API community can join in and share the burden. Marcos, give me a perspective in relationship to Dr. West and his statement.
I mean, one thing that I think about, Reverend Ray, is Gloria Ladson-Billings wrote, she spoke and then wrote about this like 12 plus years ago, where she talked about, she was challenging the idea of achievement gap, right, which is education stuff, which is what I do. But where she went with this is to say, no, we don't have an achievement gap, we have a debt, right? We have an educational debt to communities of color, and particularly to the African-American community. One of the pieces of that, so there was 4 components to that. The most salient to me was the moral debt. And when she talked about that moral debt that we owe communities of color, and specifically the African-American community, what she was saying is that debt is, there's the difference between what we know is right and what we actually do, right? And for generations, we've known what was right and we've done the opposite of that as a society, right? And so there's a moral debt that we owe to the Black community. And it's one that needs to be repaid and needs to be repaid thoughtfully, but we're doing that under the kind of need of white supremacy and the way in which it's become so pervasive and so entrenched in every facet of our country. And so I do feel like there's a moral component to the work that we need to do alongside this ideological component. And that's sounding very professorial, so I think I'll stop there.
No, that's great reflection, Marcos. And as we talked about before in a different panel, the sense of mindfulness, right? To be able to have a sense of mindfulness from a historical perspective to where we are today. So thank you for that reflection. Craig, go ahead and jump into the discussion.
Okay, thank you, Reverend Ray. Well, as a Native American community, we're no strangers to oppression. 500 years of colonization, but that came even before, some of the slave ships came on to this world anyway. And so we are very understanding, and this country has not treated the natives well, and our founding fathers, called us savages. And so we, along with the Black community, we're right there with them. And Reverend Moore and I have been said together many items, many events, and many protests. And so I think we have a silent understanding of what bothers the African American community and the Native community go hand in hand. And there is an agreement, not an agreement, but an understanding between us. And so there are a lot of mutual feelings we have together. We share a lot of things. We share some things culturally. We share languages. We share ideology. And so that's why it's so easy for the Native community to have an understanding of this, what's going on, and want change, and really, really want things to change, but also in a kind of a cynical view, we've gone through this before. Many times we've been here in the past. I keep thinking back when Marlon Brando won the Academy, and he had a couple natives come up and take his award and speak for him. And at that time there was a lot of understanding or a lot of empathy for the natives, and we thought, oh great, things may get better, but and then it dies down. And that's what I really hope the things that are going on now won't reach the same terminus. So that's all. I guess simpatico.
That's a great share, Craig. Excellent. Thank you so much, Craig. I posted something on Facebook earlier this week as I was processing Martin Luther King's speech to Stanford back in 1967. But what I posted, Craig, and as you lamented, nothing has changed. I can take that speech from 1967 and implant it in 2020, and the things of which he spoke of reverberates through this moment today. So we can no longer sit back. We must demand. And speaking of demanding, I get to go to my big brother, Reverend Jeff, to speak to this moment.
Well, thank you, Ray. Thanks to everybody again. Reminded me, W. Du Bois said that the nation has not yet found peace from its sins, and the freed man has not yet found freedom in this nation. And so what we see something today is that we're still not free as a people. What we see today is there's still a great class structure, a serf system that is in this country. We now have in the White House 46-1, a person who sits there with the intent to use those forces, all his powers, to keep that foot on the throats of the American people, and particularly those in the communities of color. So nothing's changed from Dr. King's speech in '67, and nothing's changed from W. Du Bois' words in the 1900s. What we have here is America has to deal with this mistreatment of the Black American and continued mistreatment of the native indigenous people of this land. And until you confess your sin and repent from your sin, we're going to continue to go around in this circle. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. So let's take a quick shift, because right now we're talking about rebellion in an unjust system and racism and violence against Black people. But today we see so many young folks, and I was downtown City Hall yesterday, and I was just sitting back and I was praying for the young folks and praying for their protection as they were peacefully protesting. Dr. King discusses how nonviolence against injustice must win. So the question to the panel, how would you help young people refocus their energy towards lasting justice? We just talked about the same yesterday is the same today. The only kind of same I want is God the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. So how do we help transform the rage that young folks are feeling right now in their protests and energize them to achieving lasting justice? So we may not see it in our time, but we want them to see it. So what are some of your perspectives? Marcos, we'll let you jump on in, and you're used to dealing with young folks and teaching in San Jose. So how do we refocus their energy for lasting change?
I'm going to do something my students always accuse me of doing, Reverend Ray, which is not answer the question. The thing that I'm wondering and thinking deeply about actually is redefining our construction of violence and what it means. Because what I see in schools and with young people is so much violence that's waged against them. But it's not physical violence, right? It's violence it's educational violence. right? Psychological violence, it's emotional violence, it's spiritual violence. Our kids are victimized every single day, and it hurts their spirits. It hurts them to the core of who they are. And they have no recourse. I mean, one student that I worked with told a story about a teacher saying, "I will never call on you. I will never acknowledge your presence in my classroom." And that student eventually headbutted that teacher, right? Which is totally wrong, right? Just to be clear, I'm not advocating headbutting teachers out here as a teacher myself. But that student felt there was no other way for him to be seen, right? And I think that's the issue, is like, we are not being seen. Communities of color are not being seen. Black folks are not being seen. Black young men and women and trans folks are not being seen. And what recourse do they have? And so this is a challenge that I face, is to tell them not to go out in the streets seems a little hypocritical on my part. And at the same time, I want to push them, right? I want to push them to think both about protest and about manifesting love and joy in transformative action and what that looks like. And that looks like loving hard in our communities for young people who don't have opportunities, and providing them opportunities they wouldn't have had otherwise without our mentorship, without our explicit kind of effort to demonstrate that love. So those are some initial thoughts.
Those are great thoughts. And in our chat box, and again, we welcome those who are with us live on Facebook and Zoom. In our chat box, Walter Hudson says, way back in the 70s, Bill Moyer said, to change America, we need to discover the power of disciplined rage. Is there a way to call a martial arts teacher type discipline into our spirituality? So still, these young folks, they have this rage that Marcos talks about. We push them, we back them into a corner. So Craig, how do you see us channeling this energy for lasting justice for our young people?
Okay, well, I think our role, at least my role, is to nurture the young. And I looked around the panel, and I know you've been out there in the trenches before, and I think it's our duty and our obligation to guide the youth. They have a belief. Some of them may share them with me. I may share my beliefs with them. I mean, but it is a belief, and they believe in it. And if that's what they believe, then we need to nurture that and let them be loud and proud with that. One of the things I think we can guide them with is they need to, the nature of progress, or the nature of change involves progress. It's not, we've got to shake up the status quo. We have a homogenized America over here, and people need to be shocked, sort of out of their, everyone is in a safety of a cocoon, kind of, because that's a good place to be. You feel nice and safe. You have a nice comfort zone over here. But if you want progress to happen, change to happen, then you're going to have to step out of that zone, and you're going to have to do something different. And that's where I think our role, as mentors or those that have gone through things like this before, can really help out the young people, keep them focused, keep them driven. Lord knows they have a lot of energy already, and you can see it, and you see it in their face and their eyes, and and they have this rage, but we don't want it to spill out to become a violent rage or anything, but we want to keep it in check and keep it going the right way, and I think that is our role, is nurture.
Great, thank you, Craig. And I just want one more individual to come onto this. And Zara, CAIR is very intentional about developing young leaders and giving young leaders voices. So how do you speak to this idea of energy, focusing and refocusing their energy towards lasting justice?
Just a really quick thing. I'm thinking about what Marcos said about violence and redefining violence, and appreciating the other ways in which to look at violence. The other violence I just want to name is like self-defense. So nonviolent is different from anti-violence. And so something that the Muslim community has grappled with, and I think continues to grapple with, is post 9/11, there was a lot of this, like, Islam is a religion of peace. And in reality, Islam is a religion that discourages violence, oppressive violence, malicious violence, but does permit self-defense. And so in thinking about how we're interacting with young people and particularly impacted people, it's just something I'm grappling with, because I, again, want to be thoughtful of, like, if I have not survived the violence that my neighbor has, then how do I position them, right? To say, well, you don't get to respond with violence. Like, my privilege, I think, shows through in that. And so just naming that as something that I'm grappling with, and specifically like how Muslims have continued to challenge that. Now with young people, gosh, this is such a, ordinarily, I would say, sustained action, the practice of faith, mentorship, and of course, celebrating wins as they happen, right? So there was a moment yesterday where the internet, burst into some type of joy when Attorney General Keith Ellison announced that they were bringing out charges on the other 3 officers. And I know that we're like suffering and we're crying and we're working so hard, but taking the moment to celebrate that, right? To reach into our faith practice and thank the Lord for that, to celebrate that with community, to have your mentors reach out and say, how are you doing? And to just say, like, it's not bad news every day. Some days there are good news. But lifting up also that I think that for those of us that are aging out of youth, slowly but surely, the question of how we sustain youth is also evolving. And what I'm thinking about is that access to social media, access to violent videos, right? Access to like everything that is happening. It's that Will Smith said it a couple of days ago, right? Is that none of this is new. It's just now being recorded. And so the level of spiritual care, the level of mentorship, the depth of that is needed right now by young people is so key. Knowing also that they are up against government and capitalist forces that are being more repressive than we have seen in recent years, right? So I've never seen Bay Area-wide curfews to mitigate arresting these 4 officers. We know that police officers across the country arrested nearly 10,000 protesters. And so some of it is the old tried and true strategies, but the challenge for us who are doing it, all of us, is how do we do more of it? How do we do it more empathetically? And how do we do it more patiently? Because the trauma that young people are living through right now is not like the trauma that I experienced as a teenager.
Right. They are definitely experiencing trauma and definitely being triggered. And their community is far more broader than anything we have ever seen. They're more compassionate, more loving, and we're seeing that. So the idea of finding ways to channel that rage into sustainable ways of long-lasting justice. We who've been there, done that, need to be great mentors, as you mentioned, to show them the way.
Continue to do it, right? The thing about having been there and done that is we can now say, I mean, I can say I've been doing this for 19 years. Some of you maybe a little bit longer than me, right? And so how do we take the energy that is birthed last week and ensure that 20, 30, 40 years from now, it is still there, because we know that these are lifelong fights.
Yes, absolutely. All right, great discussion. Hey, let's take a quick shift down to the ground that's happening here in San Jose. And speaking of the ground, I don't know if you guys saw the news. Big brother Jeff, Pastor Jeff, was standing there with the young folks. He was the only old man standing in front of the young folks. So we really have to pray for Jeff. So Jeff, this question is for you to lead us into this next level of discussion. You're a war buff. If you were a general on the, and you were in the war room looking at the battlefield, Jeff, how would you drive forces towards, to protect the Black lives from police violence? So you're in the war room. How would you protect these Black lives from police violence?
Well, in the war room, being a general, I think that I would be a general that would be down on the battlefield. They often credited Grant with the fact that he was down there on the field where he could see where the action, where he could see firsthand what was happening and didn't have to rely on reports and could make the adjustments. And when those that thought he should retreat, he continued to press forward. And I got that really, as enlightenment or insurance from this Grant series. I tell everybody I love history, so watching Grant and how he did it and still was discredited for his destruction of the Ku Klux Klan. So, you know, you ask me about these youth, my job is to help keep the door open and let them know that somebody that knows the rules and knows part of the policing habits. I'm standing there getting a bird's eye view, so can't tell me that the kids are making up stories. Don't tell me. I see what you're doing firsthand, and you see that I'm see what's happening. So even while down there, I told the kids to call out for Chief Garcia. Where's Chief Garcia? Come down here and take command of your troops. Chief Garcia would not answer, it couldn't be seen. He's a general sitting back in the war room someplace where he's punishing and hurting people, and he doesn't have to feel it personally. Just like today when they have their news, their news brief or their newscast, whatever they did at 1 o'clock, they went to the police department and stayed up in the shelter of a room away from the people, not dealing with the reality of what they've done to the people and talking about they don't want their police officers here. There's a problem when you concern more, and I hate to, I love people, right? But let me just put it really plain. It's those people have rocks and sticks. These guys got machine guns, helmets, and padded up. Who's hurting who? Yeah. I mean, let's be for real. And so when you knock a woman down, and we try to pick up a woman, and you get upset at us picking up a woman, something is wrong with your mindset. You are no longer there to keep the peace, but to cause destruction. So I'm there to help these kids. And like I told them today, do not destroy the property so much. We need you to be able to come back here day in and day out. And we will drain their budget till they hurt intensively, much like the boycott of the bus. 365 days they boycotted before the Montgomery got to change it once. So if we want change, we have to have soldiers and ability to go out there day after day. And also, I don't want these kids to be felonized or criminalized so that they can't get jobs, they can't be the lawyers, they can't be the judges to help turn this system around from what they experience today so that it'll never be this way. So I encourage the kids, do it nonviolently. Just get together, march down the street, and make them deploy the troops, because that's what they are. And they'll have to keep playing overtime. And at one point, the city's going to see how it's affecting their overall budget, and the city will give us our change. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, General Jeff. Thanks, General Pastor Jeff. I don't have money for bail, Jeff, and I'm not there to pick you up off of one knee, but we appreciate your leadership and being a field general down in the front line. I also listened to the police briefing today. They spoke of not letting their city being sieged, and in doing so, it looked as if they were willing to have collateral damage. That is, there were peaceful protesters right next to Jeff who were hit by the rubber bullets, who were tear gas. So it seems like there was no mindfulness in how they went about it. All right, let's take a quick shift. Jeff mentioned about, hey, making them fill it in the wallet. And Richard, I think this is a question that you can handle. Currently, the city of San Jose is experiencing a $71 million hole in the budget caused by COVID, as we all know. Elected officials look to make huge cuts to the police public safety service. So Richard, the question I have is, and Jeff, you can also speak to this. Do you think we should normalize less policing and demand restorative justice programs as an alternative? Richard, you're a lawyer. You know about restorative justice programs. So what should we do?
I mean, restorative justice really is the way to go. I think many of us in the past have talked about, well, the police force should reflect our communities, should have the same demographics as our communities. And while that may still be true, it's also true, as Jeff was mentioning, that the police really need to be reoriented to be peace officers, which means that they need to understand how to de-escalate instead of escalating a situation. The police need to be held criminally liable when they break the law, when they kill people. They need to lose their jobs when they do these things to people. And for now, we know they're not. They're really hardly ever held criminally liable. And that's really a problem. That's something that they need to understand will happen to them in the future.
Excellent, excellent. I just wanted to address that since Jeff talked about making them feel it where it hurts. So let's continue to press and go a little bit deeper, and let's go back to George Floyd. Now the question I have now that under direct pressure of global protests, elected officials in George Floyd's murder case have charged all 4 officers. Can we say hallelujah? Yet, we've been here before. We've seen police charge with various crimes, and we've seen the charges evaporate. How can we, the question now is how can changes in Floyd's case change how we demand justice for all Black lives lost to police violence? And Richard, you from the legal sense, speak to us on that.
Sure. I mean, I wanted to speak real personally as a third-generation Japanese American. You know, I'm very much aware of how an unresponsive government and indifference from American people really can result in a whole group of people being incarcerated and their constitutional rights being denied by being placed in concentration camps. So now, as a Japanese American, as an Asian American, I and we must be united for Black lives, not only when lives are lost, but also for everyday struggles for decent housing, decent wages, access to a decent education, and for fair and just treatment by law enforcement.
Great. And Zara, this is a local thing here. So the question is, locally, how can we use new tactics to push for justice for protesters who are harmed by law enforcement?
You know, it's hard. People ask me this at times. We were in Oakland yesterday protesting the curfew at the Anti-Police Terror Project protest. And I'm, you know, planning to go down to downtown San Jose tonight. And people ask me, like, well, what happens if we get hurt? Like, can we hold the police accountable? And there's an irony in that question, right? Because we're in the streets to hold the police accountable. The police are being violent at a protest about police accountability. I urge people who have been harmed, who've been hurt, who have witnessed anything, right, to document as much as possible. We know that, for example, with Officer Jared Yuen in San Jose, and his mocking of the protesters, right, his like urging of police violence against the protesters, his use of profanity while in uniform, targeting peaceful protesters, is coming to light because people documented it, right? People put it on video. I hope he never works in this town again. I'm all for restorative justice, but I don't think he should have a gun and a badge and be paid by my tax dollars, definitely not $250,000. And the way we get there is because of the recordings and the documentation. So first and foremost, people need to be documenting the injustice. Second, they need to come forward to make these complaints, right? Let's overwhelm them in the streets with the protests, and then let's overwhelm the internal affairs units and the independent police auditor with the complaints, right? Like, we know when we look at hate crimes, when we look at various other injustices that minorities experience, that there's a significant problem with underreporting. And so the reporting, the documentation, the reporting, and then the follow-up. And this is where I think, you know, your earlier question about youth and sustaining action is so relevant, but is also true for all of us. Some folks, right, like I think I didn't go to I couldn't make it to my first protest until Sunday. So I'm not on day 6 or day 7, but we know people, right? Probably Reverend Moore and others of you on this call, day 6, day 7, day 8, day 10, day 12, we have to sustain that. And sometimes that's going to mean taking the day off. It's going to mean self-care, but we know that we're getting these wins. I mentioned earlier that the officers have been charged. We know that the curfews have been lifted now in Alameda County, Contra Costa County, and San Jose, but the only way that happens is because we keep taking action. Beyond that, the thing I want to raise in a conversation that we're having in the immigrant segment of the Muslim community is also, how are we complicit in enabling police abuse and police violence? And so at CAIR, one of the things that we do, that we've been doing since Trump was elected, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to say his name on the webinar. I just feel so bad. Since 46-1 was elected, is bystander intervention trainings. And part of what we train people on is how do you safely de-escalate a hate crime? And one of the things that we talk about in there is we don't call the police. Because you know what? If you and me are in a fight and there is no gun at the scene, calling the police introduces a gun to the scene, right? If you and me are in a fight and you are undocumented, calling the police risks your ability to stay in this country. If you and me are in a fight and you are Black, calling the police to the scene risks your life, right? And so we're starting to have those conversations, is that it's not enough to hold police officers accountable after an incident has occurred. We need to defund the police, right? As the Movement for Black Lives has called for, we need to re-examine our complicity in policing, and we need to move not just individuals, but churches, mosques, synagogues, and other community institutions away from the model of, oh, something's wrong, call 911, they're going to come help you. The reality is, in many, many cases, they are not.
Yes. Excellent. Thank you for that open, honest share. Less guns, less policing, more community involvement, more community accountability. Thank you so much. So this next question, Craig and Marcos, I want you to jump in. How do we help those victimized? We've seen a lot of our brothers and sisters victimized Friday and Saturday here in Santa Clara County in San Jose. So how do we help those victimized by police violence navigate the pain? How do we help them navigate the pain? Craig, go ahead and jump in.
Well, first of all, I think whenever the police roll in and they roll in with, you know, heavily armored and their riot gear and their guns and whatnot, I mean, when they roll in like that, they're setting up a self-fulfilling prophecy. And when you set an environment like that, and the protesters are there to protest, rightfully protest, I mean, where's that going to lead? That's going to lead to violence. And so you can't come in, you know, full armor like that, you know, full on, and not expect something to not happen. So they need to be cognizant of that. Now, one of the things we talked about when Zara was talking about videotaping officers, I think we need to go one more step. When you're out there protesting, you need to protest anyone who's shouting at you, you know, anti-protesting against you, spouting off racist attitudes or anything, and you need to take a photograph of them because, you know, they're taking photographs of you, but you need to store that, show that, expose that, because, you know, this could be a potential employer or something, and you want them to be known. And so you want your brothers and sisters not to go let them know you don't want to go work for this person because this is what their beliefs are, contrary to ours. So I just wanted to bring that up again. I was thinking about that when she was speaking about the photography. Anyway, that's all right now. I kind of think right now. Let Marcos go.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I mean, this is a tough one, Reverend Ray, but I think one of the things that we want for our young people, for those people who are experiencing pain, both as a result of violence from the police, but also just as a result of watching all that we've been seeing these last week, to be in community with each other. You know, we talk about being in círculo, right? To be able to sit in a circle and to be able to share our stories and to learn from each other and to learn strategies for resilience and for thriving and moving beyond just surviving. You know, I think that's one of the ways we do it. And so that requires our community-based organizations, our faith-based organizations, to create spaces for that, to create opportunities for that. And I just wanted to, if I may, just add on one thing that we're not talking about, we haven't talked about, but that's the responsibility of the white community. And that is something that I want to just push really, really hard. I mean, I wrote something to my college earlier this week, and I said, basically, I'll do the short version, but I said the intergenerational impact of inhuman violence against the Black community has left a deep imprint on the white community, right? The efforts to dehumanize people of color over generations, raising white children to enjoy racial violence as a form of education, which, yes, has really and consistently happened, has left its mark, has allowed generations of white citizens to look the other way, or even more often to look right at racial violence and not see it. This white racial trauma has created a working and living definition of white citizenship that includes the right to racial violence without the fear of recourse. And that's what's happening now, and it's been behind all the killings of the Black folks that we're honoring today. You know, and I feel like that's the thing, is like we need white people to recognize the dehumanization that they've experienced and passed on to their children and not addressed, right? In addition to the other things that we're talking about, but that has to happen. White folks need to go home and figure out and trace their own racial trauma. Stop talking about the trauma of people of color. And then the last thing is, we do need to pursue defunding the police. You know, when I think about this, is what if all the resources that were going into the policing here in San Jose, which does nothing for the Black and brown communities here, what if those resources were dedicated to creating schools that were holistic learning and healing and nurturing spaces for students, families, and communities? What if those resources were places where people could go to heal and grow and be nurtured together? Like we're waiting for that to happen. Give me the money. I can make that happen. You know, and then you won't need police.
Excellent.
Sorry.
Thank you. No, great. Thank you for your passion. Absent from the conversation is the accountability and the responsibility relational to our white brothers and sisters. I know as a theologian, I struggle with my white Christian brothers and sisters who have sat complicit and idle. Many of my friends who I'm in relationship with, they trust me and they ask me, well, what can I do? Zara already said, why are you asking me what to do? You already know what to do. If we're amongst this great cloud of witness, the Spirit has revealed to you by living life, you see the problem. Don't be complicit. Open your mouth. Speak in the circles of influence. Zara, you're going to say something.
No, I'm agreeing with you, right? It's not only just, and I think, can I name something else just that I've been thinking about as a non-Black ally, is there's this like tension for me around Reverend Jeff, like tell me what to do, and I will be in service of you, because I am a beneficiary of the white supremacy, right? But also I want to center your leadership, and then the tension for me there is, but I also know that your hands are full and that you are busy and that you are the most traumatized of what is happening right now, and so I'm trying to navigate this middle path. But yeah, I am here in service.
Thank you, Zara, and thank you, Marcos, for your passion. I love your passion. I love your passion. All right, listen, I want to honor your time and some of the points that you lifted up, Marcos, we're going to address in the second part of our segment with our beloved community and Live Free community, where we deal with policy. And as you know, Martin Luther King says policy is good because it forces change, and over time, change and changes of habit perhaps may change the heart. And as I always say, faith is great, but faith alone cannot make an individual choose to love their brother and sister. And we've seen historically with white supremacy, racism, and bigotry, one can love God, but yet not love me as their brother. It's mind-blowing, but it's our reality. So the sense for mindfulness and this sense of calling to the carpet, the sense of being prophetic, speaking that which is right, speaking truth to power is what we need to do for a circumcision of the heart and a mindfulness. So as I close out this segment with you, I want to ask each one of you a question. And I know that you don't speak for everyone, but I want you to share in the context of the murder of George Floyd, how your culture is built in resilient movements against this institution of racism. So Richard, go ahead and talk about this in light of the murder of George Floyd and how your community is built in resilient movements against institutional racism.
Well, kind of harking back to a very tragic incident in the 80s where Vincent Chin was murdered by some unemployed auto workers. And at that time, the Asian American community was outraged because the two unemployed auto workers basically got no jail time. And at that time, the Asian American community reached out to others in the Detroit area specifically. A lot of African American leaders came together and formed a strong coalition. Eventually, the two murderers were charged under federal crimes, although they really never served any time in jail. But that experience, I kind of taught a lot of Asian American leaders that, you know, we need to reach across lines. We need to kind of deal with, you know, anti-Blackness within the Asian American community because it's there. And that's something we need to grapple with and talk about within our communities.
Thank you, Richard. We need to call each other, our communities, to the carpet as well as our white brothers and sisters. We are all complicit. So thank you. Hey, Craig, go ahead and share your thoughts of community resilience.
Well, the Natives have a lot of experience being resilient. We've had promises, we've had treaties. I think I read somewhere there are approximately 300 treaties between the Native nations and the U.S. government. And so for some tribes, you know, they do have a treaty relationship with the U.S. government, as do we. I think currently, I can't remember how many treaties my tribe has with them directly, but also a lot of these treaties have just gone by the wayside, and they're no longer, the U.S. government doesn't uphold, you know, their half of the treaty. And that leaves a lot of Natives in limbo. So actions like this, murder by the hands of the law enforcement, you know, that happens frequently to Natives. too. I remember in 2010 in Seattle, John T. Williams who was a woodworker, and a man of poor man, but he did a lot of woodworking. He always carried around a knife and wood, and he would go around and whittle and leave things around Seattle. One time he was crossing a street, and police officer was driving a patrol car, and he saw John with a closed pocket knife in his hand, and so he stopped, slammed on the brakes, flew out of the car, pointed a gun at him, said, drop it. And John was deaf, apparently, in one ear. He could partially hear in the other, and he may have had some other faculties that were compromised too. But when he turned around, holding the knife, he was immediately shot 3 times, I believe, and he died. And that made a big impact, up in the Northwest. And I think today there's a huge totem pole in downtown Seattle, his name. But the resiliency that comes from our nations is that's how we survive. And they try to rub us out, either through treaties or terminating us or getting rid of us somehow or wiping us out. Many people don't know that there were approximately 100 million people wiped out since colonization began. 100 million people in the northern and southern hemisphere in Central America, and that's greater than World War II, all the wars put together. So that's the largest genocide has been perpetrated on mankind. We have to be resilient. I think it's in our DNA, because we've been lied to so many times, and we have to go either undercover, underground, in order to survive, because they're always trying to squeeze something out of us, either our land, our blood, whatever we have. So that's part of our DNA, and how that relates to the BLM movement and the protesters. You just got to keep going, keep on keeping on, and that's what I would say to them. And through the encouragement, my encouragement, anyone's encouragement as an adult outside, realizing that things need to change. White privilege, white fragility, needs to be challenged, and be supportive in the end, and that's what it's about. And I think if we do that, then we're leading these protesters and are young on the right path. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. And Jeff, Reverend Moore, I know you got to get out of here, so I want you to share your parting thoughts, and then when you share your thoughts, let everyone know where you're going, where we can find you at 6 o'clock.
Well, before I can find myself, you guys got all these email things. I'll be on a broadcast with former prosecutor Mia Cohen and several others, and I think the podcast are over 800 people now have signed on it, so we'll be on that all back on the East Coast, and just trying to figure it all out together. That's what we're trying to do. And as I was thinking about all of this, it just dawns on me most of the time. That's why I believe sometimes we don't want to teach true world history, because the Europeans are so afraid that all the things that they've done throughout the world, people will start holding them accountable for. Mm-hmm. And that's not what it's about. But when I just looked at the map, and I understand the African-Asian connection, I look at that. There's a connection there historically. And when Columbus was trying to find his way to America, though, he was trying to find spices, a shortcut to get spices. So we were all interactive, and we didn't have as much hostility toward anyone. And if we can learn to teach that, get back to teaching the true history of the world, I think we would kill a lot of this white supremacy. In America, we have a saying about the big dog. Have you fed your dog lately? America will not go to war with China, I guarantee you. America would not go to war with Russia, I guarantee you. They will not take on North Korea because North Korea has the bomb. These countries have the bomb, and they can do as much damage as that we do to them, they can do to us. So when I watch and I see armed white militias march on state capitol, I will ask the question, where are these armed police officers in response? They're not there. There's a problem. So what you're sending a message, and that's not a good message you send us. So they are, I don't like to say they, because it's like I'm separating me from them and us from them and making more separation. But we have to begin to understand that the people that are pulling these strings will not challenge, will allow a certain segment of America with white privilege to challenge the system with weaponry, but they will come down on me in San Jose with high school and college students with military force. Where is that force when people come to the Capitol's armed? That says it's a sad state in this country, and it's a sad for leadership. So I want to look forward, and I want to give this to, I know Ron's coming on, and I want to say one thing that we can do is, I've said it before, Ron, I think you know this, is sell the ranch that's out there in Morgan Hill. Sell it, close it down, move those kids, give that to teachers' housing. With whatever money you make, help get teachers in there so we can have teachers in the public school system to work with our kids. There's a way we can do this to reset this system. And it's about resetting, because for me, we're never going back to normal. There's going to be a new normal, and that's what Americans have to be ready for. All of us, we're going to a new normal, because what we have seen, we have exposed it. Or someone told me earlier today, the rock has been lifted up, and we see all the bugs under the rock. It'd be really silly for us to say, okay, I'm gonna put the rock right back the way it was, right? We got to get all them bugs out of there. And that's gonna cost relationships sometime, and that's gonna cost, because you're on the wrong side of this. And that's, we got to hold these politicians. And, you know, I can go on and on, but we got to get big money out. And one last thing, let me close with this. We must make it an ethical dilemma for police unions to back prosecutors. If they cannot pick a prosecutor in a prosecutorial race or give him donations, then a prosecutor will be more free to then go after police when they do something wrong. But right now, it's too much of a buddy-buddy, friend-friend, I went to school with your dad relationship, and we must break that tie. And I believe if you look at it, I was trying to say this the other day, there's an ethical dilemma for attorneys to take money from organizations that they might have to turn and sue later on or something like that. And I'll give you the paper. But God bless you guys, and know that I'm with you. And my sister Virginia, I promise to be in bed before 12. How's that? Okay.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being a field general, and thank you for all that you do. All right.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Dr. P. Marcos, give us your parting words.
Oh, well, I just appreciate this opportunity, really, Reverend Ray, and your facilitation too. It's really nicely done. Yeah, I mean, I think in the Latinx community, you know, we've been doing this for hundreds of years, right? We've been bouncing back and bouncing back and bouncing back, just you know, in similar ways as the Black community. But we have ways of being and ways of knowing that are transformative, right? You can see it in our language and the way in which our language is organized around this collective identity. Like, we think in community, we build community. We're always doing that. Our students are always doing that. You know, I joke with my students sometimes about this graduation I went to where 8 students were there, and I walked into a room with 200 seats and all the seats were full, right? What that means is we run deep, right? Everybody's graduating, right? We don't look at our communities and see that. We crack on our communities and think like, oh, here they come with all their family. Yeah, that's a beautiful thing, right? We need to do that. We need to flip the script on this deficit orientation to how we look at communities of color, how we look at the Black community. And I see us doing work in the Latinx community, but we have to continue to do that as well. We have to challenge anti-Blackness in our own community, right? We have to be willing to do that work. And some of us are wanting to compete, right? In terms of, well, this happened to us, right? And the imprisonment of little babies on the border and putting them in boxes and cages, right, is aligned with what's happening to African Americans in our communities and to police violence. We have to understand those connections, the intersectionality, and we have to do that work. We're trying to do that, so I'll just give a big shout out to ethnic studies, right? We need ethnic studies. We need ethnic studies K through 12, because when we have it, our students develop these skills, and we've seen white students develop these skills in high schools where they're ready to go. They're all about it. And those are some of the students that are out on the streets right now who are fighting because they know what's up.
Thank you, Marcos, for educating the young minds and bringing the heat, and we appreciate it. All right, last but not least, Dr. Zara shares with you this resilience of your community, what we learned from the murder of George Floyd.
I think there's so much, and one of the things I'm personally learning is how important it is that we contemplate the potential consequences of any action, right? Particularly when we are invoking the powers of state-sanctioned terrorists who kill with impunity. And so over and over again, that is, for me, where I'm at, along with never knowing when life will come to a screeching halt, is that there are George Floyd's murder, George Floyd's martyrdom was followed by the martyrdom of others who've been killed by the police, who follows and is followed by, right? There's this long line. It's a blood-soaked history. And I can't imagine that George Floyd or his family knew that morning what would befall him. I'm finding hope in seeing the intersections that are being lifted up in this fight right now. Again, speaking from the perspective of immigrant Muslims, where we're able to, or starting to connect the dots, is that the same federal government which is condoning police actions right now employs Customs and Border Protection agents who target Latinx communities, who target Arab and South Asian communities, there's almost, it's a difference of kind, not horror, when we're talking about which uniform is attacking which community. And what really inspired me last night in Oakland was that the diversity of the protests, right? It was Black led, but there were Muslims, Arabs, South Asians, East Asians, Latinx people saying, we are in this together. I looked up, I took a picture, and someone was wearing a shirt that said Anti-Zionist Social Club. And I said, yeah, we're all in this together. Because the police officers here that kill people go train in apartheid Israel. And then the last thing I'm thinking about is, as a person of faith, really owning that what I am responsible for is my output and my effort, but that the outcome rests with a higher power, that God is most just, God is most merciful, and holding on to that faith is how we've had good news yesterday, we've had good news today, but we may not get good news tomorrow. And I need to remember that I can do what I can do, but that in the end, God is in control. And if I actually believe what I say I believe about God, then there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Thank you, Zara. Yes, God has it. As we would say in the Baptist Church, God has it all in control. If he can calm the raging sea, I know he'll forever take care of me. God has it all in control. I want to thank my guests, Zara, Reverend Moore, Richard, Craig, and Marcos. Thank you so much for your valuable time and sharing with us.